There are places where your name is called, but your voice isn't. Where truth is spoken in a room full of ears, and still, it goes unheard. And sometimes, the hardest part isn't what they accuse you of. It's how quickly they stop seeing you as human the moment you sit down at the defendant's table. Monica Ray had been here before. Not in that exact chair, not with those same walls, but in that silence. The kind of silence that wraps itself around your lungs and teaches you not to breathe too loudly. And when she stepped back into room 9, she thought she was just a witness, just a name on a list. But some rooms don't just hold trials. They hold ghosts, regrets, and the echoes of voices that should have been heard the first time. What happened in that courtroom wasn't just a case. It was a reckoning. And it began the moment someone who had lost everything chose to speak anyway. Let me tell you what happened next. The courtroom smelled like old wood and sterilized silence. Room 9 of Everstead County Courthouse was colder than Monica Ray remembered, though she hadn't stepped foot inside a courtroom in nearly 12 years. The windows were sealed shut, high up behind dusty glass, and the fluorescent lighting above flickered faintly, like it, too, didn't want to witness what was about to happen. She sat alone on the second bench from the back, hands folded tightly in her lap, the worn leather of her bag pressing against her hip. Nobody had acknowledged her presence, no, the clerk who took attendance, not the bailiff who stood with crossed arms, not even the public defender who glanced once and then looked away like he hadn't seen anything at all. That was the thing about being invisible. You didn't need permission to disappear. Monica had received the subpoena 2 weeks ago. A former employee at the Everstead Public Library, she had helped a local teenager, Calen Brooks, access legal databases using her login, a gesture she thought harmless at the time. She hadn't known it would spiral into a federal cybercrime investigation. She hadn't known her name would land on the witness list. And she certainly hadn't known it would bring her back into this place. But here she was. And there he was. Calen sat hunched at the defense table, dark hoodie zipped to the neck, shoulders drawn like he was bracing for a storm. He didn't look up once. The room had already decided what he was: a hacker, a thief, a problem with a mouth too smart for his own good. Monica studied the boy. 19, maybe 20, face thin but alert. The kind of face that still carried remnants of childhood cheeks not yet hardened by time, eyes too quick to trust. His hands remained folded on the table. His lawyer, a thin man with a tired tie, flipped through papers with the urgency of someone looking busy rather than prepared. And across from them stood Kimley Dorsey, assistant district attorney, buttoned, polished, and mechanical. Her voice clipped like a metronome when she stood to address the court. Your Honor, we're prepared to show that the defendant used unauthorized access to commit a data breach of Everstead Federal Credit Union, she began, not looking at Calen once. Monica didn't know why she thought it would be different this time. It wasn't. Not when Judge Gerald Colburn entered from his chamber stall, sharp-eyed, with a jawline like granite. He walked like someone who had never been questioned in his life. When he sat, the room fell even quieter, as if silence feared him. All rise, the bailiff called. Monica rose with the rest of them, though her knees didn't want to. Judge Colburn's eyes swept the room like floodlight. She stopped briefly on Monica, gave a flicker of a glance, and moved on. She felt it like a verdict. The judge didn't smile. He rarely did. Not 12 years ago, when she was still trying cases. Not now. Colburn was the kind of man who spoke in declarations, not conversation. Let's proceed. And just like that, the gavel wasn't needed. Power didn't shout. It whispered and watched. The prosecution laid out the timeline. Multiple unauthorized login attempts, traced to Calen's student ID, library terminal access records, time-stamped print logs. Each one presented cleanly, confidently. The jury, a collection of 12 faces Monica couldn't yet read, nodded along. A few scribbled notes. Most didn't. What disturbed her wasn't just how neat the narrative was, it was how easy it seemed to accept. A young black man, A trail of digital evidence. A sleepy town with something to prove. Calen hadn't said a word. His lawyer only interrupted twice, softly, like he was afraid to wake a sleeping dog. Judge Colburn didn't question anything. He rarely did. He barely looked at the exhibits. He let Dorsey's rhythm unfold uninterrupted, as if he were merely there to ratify a result already known. Monica clenched her hands tighter. She had sat in courtrooms like this before. Years ago, she had tried her last case as a public defender, a case that broke her in ways she hadn't been able to name at the time. A case that involved a teenage boy not, unlike Calen, accused of robbery, based solely on proximity, skin color, and silence. Her brother, Darren Ray. She had failed him. 12 years later, she still remembered how the judge wouldn't let her introduce the surveillance footage because of a timestamp error. She remembered the way the jury didn't even look at Darren when the verdict was read. She remembered how he didn't cry, how he just stared forward, like crying wouldn't make sense in a world that had already erased him. And now, sitting in this courtroom, Monica felt time collapse. Different boy, same silence. Different charges, same outcome. She scanned the room again. The prosecutor's desk was immaculate documents stacked with geometric precision, highlighters uncapped, photos framed for optimal effect. The defense side looked temporary, as if no one expected them to win, only to exist. She didn't want to be here, but she was. Judge Colburn leaned forward now, motioning for the next exhibit. His voice was like gravel smoothed over by decades of unchecked power. Proceed. Calen finally looked up briefly. His eyes met the judge's. It was a mistake. Colburn's lip curled ever so slightly. Not a smile. Something colder. A flicker of disdain, as if Calen's gaze itself was an offense. Monica's heart thudded. This is what it felt like, she thought, to watch someone be buried alive in real time. No dirt, just protocol, just procedure, just the slow suffocation of due process done wrong. Her name hadn't been called yet. She wasn't even sure when she would be needed. She had thought she'd be asked to speak about the library computer usage, maybe to verify login records, maybe to give context. But now she wasn't so sure. Something about this trial felt too smooth, too tight, like the whole thing was a trap already sprung. She shifted in her seat. The wood creaked beneath her. A man beside her gave a look that suggested she was being disruptive. She looked down at her shoes. They were old, professional, worn, the kind you wore when you needed to look like you belonged but didn't believe it anymore. Someone coughed behind her. Monica remembered what her brother had whispered to her after the verdict all those years ago, when the guards were about to take him away. You think the law doesn't see us, but it sees us just fine. It just doesn't care. She blinked. Back in room 9, Dorsey was holding up a USB stick, dramatically pointing to the screen where a digital log flickered to life. And this is where the defendant accessed the administrative system. The jury squinted. Calen looked down again. No one looked at Monica. No one ever did. But she saw that the IP address on the print logs didn't match the library terminal. She saw that the timestamp was exactly the same as the moment she remembered rebooting that system due to a software update. She saw that the clean line of evidence had a fingerprint too polished to be real. And suddenly, something shifted in her. A tight knot in her chest began to rise. Because if she didn't speak now, this would become another name on another file that would sit on another shelf forgotten. And Monica Ray knew that silence wasn't neutral. It never had been. Monica didn't remember when her breathing had changed, only that it had. It came shallow now, tight across her ribs, the way it had the night her brother was sentenced, as if her lungs had been ordered to keep quiet. Judge Colburn called for a brief recess. The jury was dismissed to the lounge. Lawyers shuffled their papers. Bailiffs exchanged muttered instructions. And Calen remained seated, still, like a statue too tired to fall. Monica stayed where she was, hands clasped, jaw locked, heart a dull drumbeat in her chest. No one looked at her. No one asked her anything. She was a name on a sheet, not a person in the room. And yet, somehow, she was carrying all of it. Every inch of air in room 9 felt heavier now. The air conditioning buzzed faintly, but it didn't help. The silence wasn't relief, it was weight. Calen had said only 2 things since the morning session began. One was, "Yes, ma'am," to a bailiff's direction. The other had been "No, sir," to the prosecutor's question about whether he had ever written code. That was it. Monica kept staring at him. She saw how he sat back straight, legs together, like someone who had learned long ago that taking up space was dangerous. His fingers traced an invisible pattern on his thigh, like muscle memory, possibly piano keys, possibly code. Something learned, something not violent. The door behind her creaked. An older white man in a brown blazer walked in, possibly from the county press, and sat 2 rows behind her. He didn't speak, just opened a small notepad and clicked his pen once. Loud, deliberate, like even silence here had hierarchy. Monica shifted her focus back to the front. Judge Colburn was back early. All rise. They did. All seated. And silence reclaimed the room like a returned king. "Ms. Ray, please approach the witness stand." The words dropped with no warning. She rose. Her knees protested, her throat tightened, but her feet obeyed. She stepped slowly past the gallery, past the jury box, past the barrier that had once separated her from the bench during her years as a defender. Everything looked smaller now, not physically, spiritually. "State your name for the record," Dorsey said. "Monica Ray." "And your former occupation?" Monica hesitated. "Librarian." "No," Dorsey said, her voice tipping ever so slightly. "Before that." Pause. "Public defender. 12 years. Some of the jurors shifted. Dorsey nodded like she already knew. "And you're currently employed by the Everstead Public Library?" "I resigned 2 months ago." "Why?" "I was tired," Monica answered. "And I stopped believing people read the truth, even when it was right in front of them." A few brows rose. Dorsey let it sit for a beat. "You granted access to legal databases to Mr. Brooks?" "Yes." "Was that authorized?" "It was not prohibited." A faint smile from Dorsey. "But not formally permitted either?" "No." "Did you know Mr. Brooks intended to use the databases for anything beyond academic research?" "No." "Are you aware he used your credentials to print sealed financial documents?" Monica blinked. "That print job didn't come from the library terminal." Dorsey paused just for a moment. "How would you know that?" "Because the timestamp matches exactly the moment our system was down for a firmware reboot. No machine was active." "You're certain?" "I initiated the restart myself." Murmurs. Dorsey adjusted her glasses, forced calm into her voice. "No further questions." Colburn didn't speak. The bailiff nodded. "You may step down." Monica nodded once, walked back to her seat, eyes forward. She didn't look at the jury, didn't look at Calen, but she felt it something subtle had shifted. Not enough to change direction, but enough to unsettle balance. And then the silence came back. Thicker now, not just heavy, punishing. The prosecution resumed its case with a new witness, an IT technician, who claimed logs matched Calen's credentials. But his hands trembled. His voice cracked twice. He avoided Monica's eye. The jury didn't nod anymore. They sat still, as if listening had become dangerous. Calen stayed quiet, still hunched, still alone. But now, Monica watched closely. He was shaking, not visibly, internally, like something inside him was collapsing, but not breaking, just folding in, the way a soul does when it's been silenced too long. She knew that, look. She had seen it in Darren. The same micro-expressions, the same tight jaw, the same vacant stillness. Not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much, and knew it wouldn't matter. Because here, truth wasn't evidence. Truth was performance. And Calen didn't know how to perform. Not like Dorsey, not like Colburn, not like the system that smiled politely while building graves under marble floors. The cross-examination ended. Defense counsel offered no rebuttal, no objection, no motion to suppress. Nothing. Because in Everstead, they didn't teach defense lawyers how to fight, just how to comply. The courtroom recessed again, this time longer. Calen's shoulders curled inwards. His lawyer scribbled something and whispered. Calen nodded once. Blank. The gallery emptied. But Monica stayed, and the silence stayed with her. For 20 minutes she sat, surrounded by wood panels and shadowed lights, listening to the courtroom breathe like a sleeping beast. Its breath reeked of resignation. She didn't cry. She hadn't in years. But her throat burned. She thought about walking out. Thought about pretending she hadn't seen the IP mismatch. Thought about what would happen if she did speak, if she really spoke. Would they listen? Would they care? Would she just become another angry black woman with an opinion? Was that how they had seen her before? Is that why she had been dismissed so easily when she tried to overturn Darren's case? She clenched her hands, tried to steady herself, and then something inside her whispered, not loud, but sure. He needs someone who knows what it feels like to disappear. She closed her eyes, listened, let the silence press down until it became a companion. Because sometimes, in a room designed to make you vanish, the only way to survive is to stay. The afternoon light through the high courthouse windows had turned a dull amber gray. It gave the impression of time passing without progress, like something fading while pretending to endure. Monica sat still, spine upright, every muscle taut, the way a tree holds itself through winter wind. Inside, something had begun to shake loose, though she didn't know yet what. The judge called the court back to order. Calen's public defender rose and adjusted his tie with the anxiousness of a man preparing to fail politely. His statement was short, apologetic, even 2 minutes of tepid breath before yielding the floor entirely to the prosecution for final arguments. No call to the stand. No exhibits. No questions for clarification. Nothing. And yet, Judge Colburn allowed it to continue without question. He didn't ask why the defense had no rebuttal. He didn't press for more. He simply moved along. Another quiet signal that this trial had never been about truth. It had always been about formality, about satisfying the ritual of fairness without its spirit. Calen sat motionless, eyes dim. Monica watched his chest rise slowly, like breath was something borrowed, not owned. Then the moment came sudden, small, and nearly invisible. Dorsey handed the judge a folder. He flipped it open. Monica's eyes caught the page. As he turned it, page 3 of the access logs, printed again. Except this time, something was different. It had been reordered, reformatted, lines missing. And someone had initialed the bottom. Someone who wasn't supposed to be on the case. Her stomach twisted. Colburn nodded, then looked toward the jury. "You will now deliberate," he said. But before the bailiff could move, a voice broke the room. Not loud, not raised, but full, even, like something solid cutting through fog. "Your Honor?" Every head turned. It was Calen. His voice was rough from disuse, not defiant, not frightened, just real. Colburn's gaze narrowed. "You are not permitted." "I understand," Calen said softly, standing. That alone was shocking. He had sat hunched all day, small as a whisper, but now he stood shoulders still, unsure, but standing nonetheless. "I know I'm not supposed to speak. He paused, voice catching slightly. "I need to ask, why was the page changed?" Silence. Cold, sharp, immediate. Dorsey rose instantly. "Objection. This is irregular." Colburn raised a hand. "Sit down, Miss Dorsey." Even his voice sounded unsure for the first time. Monica's eyes flicked to the jury. Their backs straightened. Calen's eyes searched the room, not to argue, not to accuse, but to be seen. The need wasn't for escape. It was for recognition. For the unbearable ache of being called what you are not, and having no words allowed to say otherwise. Those logs were different this morning, Calen continued. I saw them. I looked at every line, but now there's something gone. Dorsey stood again, louder this time. Your Honor, this is a desperate attempt to manipulate perception. Calen didn't flinch. I'm not trying to win, he said quietly. I already know what happens here. That sentence hit like thunder. Not because of how he said it, but how true it sounded. I'm just asking if anyone else sees it too. He looked at the jury, at Monica, at no one in particular. It wasn't a performance. It was a final breath before drowning. And Monica, without thinking, stood too. No permission. No cue. Just instinct. Your Honor, she said, her voice firm, clear. Sit down, Miss Ray, Colburn warned, not yet turning his head. She didn't. I've reviewed that log in the original discovery, she said. What's on that page now isn't what I saw. Colburn finally looked at her, cold, calculated. This is highly irregular. It's also highly illegal, Monica said, and I'm prepared to swear under oath, now or in federal court. The room held its breath. Colburn looked at the bailiff. Remove her. But no one moved. Not immediately. Because something in his voice had changed just slightly. Not power, not anger. Tension. Someone else stood. A juror. Middle-aged woman, hand trembling. She said, halting, I think she's right. Now another. I noticed the print layout changed too. Colburn's knuckles whitened. Dorsey's lips parted, but no words came. Then Monica turned to Calen. And for the first time, he looked seen. I believe you, she said. It wasn't grand. It wasn't loud. But it cracked something in the ceiling of that courtroom. Not a collapse, but a fracture wide enough for light to start slipping in. That fracture was enough. Because it gave everyone else in the room permission to feel the thing they hadn't dared doubt. Colburn pounded his gavel. This court is adjourned until further review, he said sharply, but the words had no weight. The silence that followed wasn't fear anymore. It was awakening. The bailiff's hand hovered but never touched Monica's shoulder. The judge stood, paused, then walked out faster than usual. Dorsey packed slowly, hands stiff, eyes refusing to meet anyone's. And Calen? He exhaled, long, deep, as if the air finally belonged to him again. 3 days passed before the hearing was called again. Room 9 looked the same, but Monica felt something different in the air thinning. A shift, like the room had once been fortress stone but now had hairline fractures running through its walls. The world outside had begun whispering. A journalist from the Everstead Beacon had quietly leaked the discrepancy in the digital logs. The public defender's office filed a late motion to suppress. The clerk of court was on administrative leave. Whispers had names now. And Judge Gerald Colburn had returned, quieter. The bailiff's call echoed as usual. All rise. They did. All seated. They obeyed. But something else had settled too. The ritual no longer held the room in the same chokehold. Monica sat in the second row again. Same seat, same posture, but not the same silence. Calen was beside his new counsel brought in from State Defense. Sleeves rolled, energy taut. He whispered something to Calen. Calen gave a short nod, still nervous, but not crushed. Then the judge turned to Monica. Ms. Ray, Colburn said, voice deliberately neutral, we will hear your clarification under oath. She stood. This time her steps didn't hesitate. She took the stand with calm precision, her hand pressed to the Bible, though she hadn't prayed in years. Dorsey wasn't here. A substitute prosecutor sat expressionless, eyes flicking only to Colburn when necessary. The court clerk called for the statement, but Monica didn't look at the clerk, or at Calen. She looked straight at the judge. And then, without prompting, she began. I practiced law in this courtroom for almost a decade, she said. I've stood before 3 different judges here, all of them with different tempers, different politics, different approaches. But they all knew one thing, that when the people in this room stop listening, the system doesn't just fail, it decays. Colburn leaned back slowly, arms crossed. She continued. There was a time, Judge Colburn, when I believed your silence was strength, that your brevity was wisdom. But I've come to see it as something else. Not caution, not discipline, but contempt. Contempt for being questioned, for being made to see. Her voice did not tremble. She wasn't raising it. She didn't need to. In the first hearing, when I pointed out the tampered evidence, you didn't ask for clarification. You didn't investigate. You shut it down. Efficiently, quietly, completely. That wasn't justice. That was control. A murmur in the gallery. Monica paused only briefly. Let it die down. Do you know what I remember most about practicing here? She asked quietly. It's not the victories. It's not even the losses. It's watching defendants who knew they were already doomed walking into this room like it was a formality, like nothing they said would matter. She turned, eyes scanning the jury. I used to think that silence was weakness, that they had given up, but I was wrong. It wasn't weakness. It was strategy. It was survival. When people don't believe they'll be heard, they stop wasting breath. Now, she turned back to Colburn. The room waited. And that's what power really is, isn't it? She said. Not yelling, not threatening, just making sure your silence is louder than anyone else's words. Colburn shifted slightly. A flick of his fingers on the bench. A tightening in his jaw. But he said nothing, because there was nothing safe left to say. And then Monica finished not with anger, but with truth. There was a boy once, my brother, who stood in this very room. He wasn't perfect, but he was honest. And you didn't see him. Or maybe you did, and you decided not to care. That day, I thought justice had failed. But today, I see it differently. It didn't fail. It just followed the path you gave it. Silence. A long one. Then a voice from the jury box. Tentative but audible. She's right. Another one whispered, I remember her brother. Someone in the gallery stood up just for a moment. A ripple passed through the room like wind over wheat. Judge Colburn didn't reply. Not directly. But his eyes had changed. There was no fury, no denial, just stillness. The stillness of a man who had spent too long mistaking obedience for righteousness and was finally being shown the difference. Monica stepped down. Calen watched her, not like a savior, not like someone who had saved him, but like someone who had stood up when standing up was hard. And that was enough. 3 months later, Room 9 was no longer in use. The official notice posted on the courthouse bulletin board said, under renovation, but everyone in Everstead knew. The truth didn't need a press release. Judge Colburn had taken a leave of absence. Rumors followed like shadow squiet settlements, an internal ethics review, sealed files. Dorsey had transferred out of state. No one said her name aloud anymore. Calen Brooks was home. The charges were dropped due to procedural inconsistencies. That was the language they used, neutral, polished, and sterile. But Calen didn't care about the wording. He cared about walking outside without a shadow. He cared about finally breathing like he belonged somewhere. As for Monica Ray, she didn't return to practicing law. She didn't want to win arguments anymore. She wanted to build places where people like Calen never needed defending to begin with. So she took the library job again, but with a change. Once a week, after closing hours, the conference room was rearranged. A whiteboard brought in, folding chairs set up. No sign on the door, just a quiet invitation through word of mouth. She called it Room 9. The irony wasn't lost on her. Every Thursday evening, the room filled with young people, some on probation, some expelled from school, others just trying to stay invisible. Monica didn't teach law. She taught reading. Reading legal forms, employment contracts, search warrants, history, power. The kind of reading that could keep you alive. One evening, the room was full. A teenager named Marcus was reading aloud a paragraph about due process when a knock came at the door. A woman entered young, pressed blazer, phone in hand. Monica Ray? Yes. I'm with the State Herald. Mind if I ask a few questions? The room grew quiet. Monica nodded slowly, after class. The students filed out an hour later. Some nodded. Some lingered. One whispered, "Thank you," as he slipped out the door. Monica stayed seated. The reporter sat across from her, recorder in hand. "You've been quiet since the Colburn hearing. Any reason you haven't spoken publicly?" "I already spoke," Monica said, folding her hands. "I said what needed to be said. The rest belongs to time. Why open this program?" Monica looked around the room, the worn chairs, the whiteboard stained from dry markers, the second-hand books stacked against the walls. "Because the courtroom isn't the only place justice lives," she answered. The reporter leaned forward slightly. "If you had one thing to say to the people who once dismissed you, underestimated you, or tried to silence you, what would it be?" Monica paused. Her eyes drifted to the far wall, where a simple poster hung white letters on black canvas, a quote she had written herself, taped there on the very first night of Room 9. She smiled, a tired, knowing smile. Then she spoke. "The problem with power is it teaches people to stop listening until the quiet ones are the only voices left that matter." The reporter didn't write anything down. She didn't need to. The room had said enough. And Monica once erased, once ignored it, never spoken louder. Sometimes the heaviest silence isn't when no one speaks. It's when you finally do, and the room still pretends you don't exist. Monica didn't yell. She didn't fight back with fists or fury. She stood in the very room that once tried to erase her, and chose clarity over revenge, dignity over noise. And in doing so, she reminded us that the strongest voices don't always echo, they endure. Have you ever been in a place where you felt unseen, misunderstood, where speaking up felt dangerous, but staying silent felt like betrayal? If you have, you're not alone. This story is a quiet call for courage, for finding the strength to be steady, even when no one claps for you, for knowing that you matter, even if the system forgets your name, and for believing that sometimes your calm presence is the most powerful form of resistance. If this episode moved you, I invite you to subscribe and leave a comment. Tell us how it made you feel. Share it with someone who might need to hear it tonight, because stories like these are how we hold the light for one another. And remember the words Monica left behind. The problem with power is it teaches people to stop listening until the quiet ones are the only voices left that matter. I'll see you in the next story. Stay tuned.